Hi everyone, Joseph here, and today I wanted to talk about the structures of the embryonic brain. Now, the embryonic brain is divided into three major components: the hind brain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Now, the hind brain is made up of two subcomponents, the myelencephalon and the metencephalon. So, the myelencephalon is at the very bottom, and how I like to think of it as it is at the bridge between the spinal cord, myela, and the head, cephalon. So the myelencephalon is comprised of the reticular formation, and the reticular formation is responsible for sleep, it's responsible for alertness, it's responsible for some of like the lower, more instinctual behaviors that humans generally have. And also, moreover, the metencephalon, right above it, is comprised of the pons and the cerebellum. Now, the pons is responsible for rerouting communication signals all over the brain, while the cerebellum is responsible for fine motor control. So if, say, I'm trying to write a paper with my hands, then I couldn't maintain that really nice handwriting if I didn't have my cerebellum. So what that means is, if I had damage to the cerebellum, I think it'd be hard to either write, and while it's also responsible for balance, it'd be really difficult to ride a bicycle if I had damage to my cerebellum. So these two components here are the components of the hindbrain, where I would expect to find at the very bottom, closer towards the neck region, where it's most protected. Now we're going to move into the midbrain and talk about the mesencephalon here. Now, the mesencephalon is comprised of two major components: a tegmentum at the very bottom, tegmentum at the bottom, and tectum at the top. The tectum is a covering, or is a roof, while the tegmentum is a covering. It's really just a way to try to remember. Now, within the tectum, there are two small hills, two colliculi. The superior, which is above, the superior colliculi, and the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi is responsible for visual motor function, while the inferior colliculi right below it is responsible for auditory function. And a good way of remembering this is if you think frontal parietal occipital, where the visual cortex is. So if you think of right above it, it's the occipital lobe, then right below it is the temporal lobe. So superior colliculi within the occipital lobe, visual motor, and the inferior colliculi within the temporal lobe, which is auditory function. So these are two major regulators of auditory function and the visual motor function. Now, below that, in the tegmentum is comprised of the periaqueductal gray, the red nucleus, and the substantia nigra. The substantia nigra is what's implicated in Parkinson's disease, as it atrophies neurons within the substantia nigra, don't create as much dopamine, and as a result, we get the tremors that's characteristic of Parkinson's. We get slow walking, we get rigidity from Parkinson's patients because of the neurons in the substantia nigra. And the periaqueductal gray is responsible for addiction to opioids. So in terms of thinking of reward-motivated behaviors, if we did a PET scan, which shows activity in the brain, we would expect the periaqueductal gray to light up in response to morphine or any other opioid derivatives. So that is the midbrain, and now we're going to move into the forebrain. So the forebrain is comprised of two components, just like the hindbrain: the diencephalon and the telencephalon. Now, the best way to think of this is the diencephalon is below the telencephalon, but there's not too much, I looked at the prefixes, there's not really a great way to remember these. So just remember the diencephalon is made of two major brain parts. We're thinking the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Hypo as a prefix for below. This is the thalamus, this is the hypothalamus. The thalamus is a sensory switchboard which takes in information from the afferent nerve cells, and it essentially processes that information and sends it out to the brain gray matter. So the diencephalon's thalamus is responsible as like a kind of switchboard. You can think of a person saying, "Hey, signal from the eyes, go there. Hey, signals from from someone touching something, you go there," and essentially reroutes information to wherever it needs to be. Now the hypothalamus right below it actually has quite a different function, even though they share similar names. The hypothalamus is responsible for regulation and control of the anterior and posterior pituitary gland right below it, and this is really where we have homeostatic control via hormones, which are just chemicals released into the body to regulate whether the body, or to tell the body whether or not it's in a stressful state, whether it's in a hungry state. This is really like a major controller of the pituitary gland, which releases the hormones. The hypothalamus right above it tells it when to release the hormones. And finally, the telencephalon is the majority of the mass of the brain. It's actually, in fact, 85% of the mass of the brain. So when you think of the pink, gray, mattery like brain that you see on television with on cartoons, they're really what they're showing you is the telencephalon as it gets entirely developed. And this is the entire cerebral cortex. So just to reiterate, the brain is made up of 5 subsections, 3 major ones being the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, where the forebrain is comprised of the myelencephalon and the metencephalon, whereas the midbrain is comprised just of the mesencephalon, and finally, the forebrain is comprised of the telencephalon and the diencephalon. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hope this teaches you a little bit something about the brain. Thank you.